Welcome to the K20 Center's Zoom Into Your Career video series. These online career expos give students a way to explore many interesting careers and learn about their career options from volunteer professionals. Betsy Britt owns GroWell Nutrition, developing personalized nutrition plans based on medical and cultural needs. She's a licensed dietitian.
What do dietitians do? So basically, we are the food and nutrition experts that doctors go to, families go to, all sorts of people go to for nutrition and food help. So we work with a really large group of people, a large population of people, and we help people with any kind of their healthy lifestyle goals or any kind of chronic disease that that person might have that requires dietary management. And so we work in a lot of different settings, and believe it or not, we all have very, very different specialties. So going along with that, I want to show you. So here's some different ways that we work with our clients. So for example, these people over here are maybe working in a kitchen or in a restaurant or in a nursing home. So those are the food service dietitians, and they help with menu development. And this person over here is actually a school-based nutritionist. So all of your school lunches, for example, are signed off by a dietitian. So if you didn't know that, that is who is making sure all your school lunches are meeting all the requirements to make sure you guys are healthy and growing. There's dietitians in grocery stores now, helping people with their grocery shopping, making sure they're making healthy choices. There's dietitians in research, and so they're helping with new trials and all sorts of stuff, making sure we're giving out the best advice. And this one right here is super popular. They're sports nutritionists. So like NFL players, Oklahoma's football team, they all have dietitians on their staff, making sure that their athletes are fueling well. And here I am. This is me with my first job. I was working in a pediatric hospital. So I was working with critically ill children, making sure that they were getting the the nutrition that they needed while they were super sick. All right, so some skills that are required in order to be a dietitian. You have to be really great at being a problem solver. There's a lot of things that will come up, especially now when I'm counseling families that don't really have a very clear defined answer, and it's just coming up with an answer that works the best for that family. You have to have really great organizational skills. Again, we have a pretty large caseload of patients, and so making sure you're keeping everyone's needs straight. Like even now, I'll have 5 family members that I'm working with, and they each have their own goals and calorie and protein, all of their individual needs. So we have to make sure we're keeping all of that organized. You have to have really great people skills and speaking skills because you're talking to people a lot. So not only are you talking to clients, you're working with other professional individuals. Like I speak with doctors a lot. And so being able to speak with them in a professional way is really helpful. And then in terms of knowledge, I took a lot of biology and chemistry starting back in high school and then through college and my graduate degree. So that's really the fundamental education for our profession. And then, of course, you have to know about different disease states and how they're related to nutrition. For example, someone who has kidney disease doesn't have the same needs necessarily as someone who is underweight. And so you kind of have to have an understanding of how nutrition affects those specific people, so you can help them the best. All right, so let's talk about the education required. It's a long one. So it's college, so with a 4-year degree, and it has to come from an accredited program. There's only certain accredited programs in the country, so certain universities offer that program, and you have to go to one of those in order to qualify for a dietetic internship. So a dietetic internship is basically a nutritionist's residency. So you have to have 1,200 hours of supervised practice, working in a broad variety of nutrition settings. And that takes about 9 months. So the majority of it is going to be working in a hospital setting, making sure that you're taking good care of your patients and you're keeping them safe. After that, you have to have a national certification. So there's a test you have to take. And then each state has its own licensure laws. So sometimes you'll have to have state licensure, sometimes you don't. It just depends on what state that you're located in. And with both this national certification and state licensure, there's 30 hours of continuing education needed every 2 years. So Every year you need 15 hours of continuing education credit. So I'm constantly reading, learning new stuff, making sure I'm staying updated on the newest information out there, because nutrition is a very quickly evolving field. We are learning a lot more stuff. And so things and recommendations change pretty frequently. And then starting in 2024, everyone has to have a graduate degree before they can apply for a national certification. So I already have my graduate degree, so thankfully I don't have to go back and get one. But so you're talking about 4 years of college plus 2 years of a graduate degree plus a year of internship. So it's a pretty long process. So some salary info here, since I'm sure that that's a big question. So I can tell you that the salary ranges are very, very, very large. For example, I would say if you were working in a hospital setting, you would be expecting to make anywhere from 50,000 to maybe 65,000, depending on where you were located. Now, if you're working like part-time or something, or maybe in a lower paying job, maybe working for the government, you may be in this range down here towards the end. Now, if you're someone who's like in a private practice or you're working at a higher level, you're going to be, this is like a very low end. For example, one of the dietitians that I work with makes $1 million a year. So it's a really, really large range on how much money that you can make. And it really just depends on how much work you want to put into it and how much you want to get out of it. All right, so why do I do what I do for a living? So I think this is the biggest question. As you know, you guys heard in my introduction, I started my own business. And just as a detail, like I decided I was gonna be a dietitian when I was 14. So I was your guys' age when I decided I was gonna be a dietitian. And my story is I was an athlete my entire life, and I wanted to learn how to fuel athletes. And so I'm from Cincinnati, and so I worked with a dietitian who was working with the Xavier basketball team, and we were doing some fat analysis on them. And I thought it was going to be like the coolest job. I was going to work with these professional athletes. I was going to make sure that they're meeting all their goals. And so that's what I went to college for. And then in my junior year of college, I started working in the pediatric population, and I really found out that was a much better fit for me. I like to help kids from an early age because I know there's a lot of nutrition struggles that start at a young age and then can progress throughout the lifespan. So I was working at a diabetes camp for children with type 1 diabetes, and that's really what made me move forward in the pediatric field. So I've worked in a huge variety of environments. I've worked with kids with brain tumors, with cystic fibrosis, children who are in the ICU that are maybe post-accidents or trauma in some way. And now I work in an outpatient setting where I see kids with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, maybe weight loss, picky eating, and food allergies, and even eating disorders. So I work with a huge variety of kids, and I've moved towards nutrition counseling as opposed to just meeting with someone, telling the doctor what their needs are, and then hopping away from that. So my counseling now is working with families on how we can change their daily behavior to either prevent any kind of chronic disease or reverse any kind of chronic disease symptoms or test values or that sort of thing that family might be struggling with. So it makes it a more unique challenge for me, and I really find it rewarding to see how what I'm doing is affecting their daily lives. You can actually tell pretty quickly with like people losing weight or changing the way that they're eating. And I think it's just the most valuable thing to hear that from them. And that's really what keeps me going and keeps me motivated in my own practice. So, you know, I work from home. It's pretty great. I see clients when I want them to be on my schedule, and we set goals and we make sure they're meeting those goals. And that's about it. You know, I have a pretty laid back job. It's nice to work from home, and it's really, really flexible. So if you guys, you know, want to consider, if you have a passion in nutrition, it's a really great, flexible career field. And there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. And that's really, you know, the end of my presentation. And I'm happy to answer any kind of questions that you guys might have regarding it.
I really did like what you said before we jump into questions about how you got through part of your college experience and went, you know what, this is not the right area for me. And you kind of switched it up, because there's nothing wrong with that. You know, follow like what sounds good to you. And then if things change, like be flexible, change it up, you know, go in the direction that you feel like you should be going in. So that's really awesome. And I think a strong characteristic, you know, somebody, you know, following what's interesting to them. My first question for you is, what skill set do you think is really important for this job? Maybe not the educational skill set, but like the kind of more personal skill set that you use every single day working with your patients.
Yeah, so I think it's just the ability to communicate with your patients. You have to be a really good listener. And also, you have to be really good at kind of like determining how someone's mood is and getting deeper in there and deciding, like, is there really a bigger problem that we need to address? For example, a lot of people are not very forthcoming on what's bothering them. And so it's just kind of like being a counselor and figuring out what is actually the root of this problem and how we can fix that problem.
Awesome.
That's the
And you
biggest.
talked about doing counseling sort of more now than you did in the past. So did you do any additional schooling or training specifically to know kind of how to counsel people with that on top of your like degrees?
Yeah, so basically, nutrition counseling doesn't require additional certification. And honestly, if I feel like one of my clients would benefit from seeing a professional counselor, they'll usually see them in conjunction with me. So I am definitely aware of what my limitations are. However, my counseling is more structured of finding out the problems that are affecting my families and how we can kind of overcome those barriers.
Awesome. We do have a classroom question, and I know you talked a little bit about your pathway, but the question is, again, how many years does it take to become a dietitian?
Yeah, definitely. So right now it takes 4 years of college, so 4 plus 9 month internship. That's the basic bare minimum. So I would say 5 years is the bare minimum, but again, that's changing in 2024.
And if people are having to go back for their graduate degree in 2024, does it have to be within a certain category, or can they kind of stretch their graduate degree into a different area and still have it
Yeah,
qualify?
so they're grandfathering in a lot of dietitians, so they're not going to have to go back and get one. However, moving forward, they're working on very specific information on whether or not what degrees are going to be accepted. So, for example, my master's degree is in science, so I have a master of science. So I did a lot of research with my degree. However, there's also masters of public health. There's masters of business administration. All of those are actually really helpful in the dietitian setting, and it just depends on how you want to be, like what kind of dietitian you want to be, on what kind of graduate degree is going to be most beneficial.
What colleges offer the courses required to become a dietitian?
Yeah, so there is a very, very specific list on the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, and it has to come from an accredited program in order to be selected for a dietetic internship. I can just tell you guys how crazy this process is, okay? So you have to go and apply to whatever internships you want, and there's maybe a couple hundred in the country. And so after you've done all of your college's work, or you've done all your college work, you've done all of your extracurriculars, you apply for this internship. And then based on how you rank those programs and how they rank you, about half of the people will get a dietetic internship. So it's really, really, really competitive to become a dietitian, which I think a lot of people think is super surprising. So like for my university, for example, we were encouraged not to apply unless we had a pretty high GPA, because the match rate is just that low. So it's pretty competitive, and you have to work pretty hard in school and have a lot of extracurriculars to be accepted to even be on that track.
Yeah, so perseverance is going to be really important.
You talked about the most rewarding part of your job right now, but I
Mhm.
think some students would be interested to know what are some challenges that you have to face working from home and running your own business?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I'm one of those people, I always have been, that I am very much a perfectionist. And so when things may not go according to plan, like maybe my technology is not working, or maybe the internet's out, or maybe one of my kids is crying, or the dog is barking, that for me is like the biggest barrier that I work around. However, I know for my patient's sake, bringing them into an office setting can be very intimidating. So allowing them to continue to see me from their home, I just kind of have to deal with the fact that it's not going to be perfect. And that is just like probably for me, the hardest part of working from home. Working in nutrition in general, it's just understanding that people will have knowledge, but they will continue to intentionally doing things that cause long-term damage. And there's just some people that I can't get through to. And that is really, really hard for me personally with the profession.
Well, the good news is in the time of COVID, everyone is having opportunities to sometimes be at home. So hopefully there's some flexibility and understanding there, but I can agree with you on that. That would be challenging. We've got a few other questions. Will you remind us again what college that you attended?
So I went to Miami University. It's in Oxford, Ohio. My brother, though, teaches at the OU. So I'm very connected with OU, but I went to the University of Georgia for grad school. So I am a Bulldog.
If there's anything in high school that you should do to become a dietitian.
Yes. So I took a lot of the coursework that I didn't really want to have to take when I was in college, when I was in high school. So basically what I did is I took a lot of the electives that you have to take when you go to a college when I was in high school. So I took a lot of AP classes. I took AP history, AP biology, AP government, and AP psychology, because I wanted to get those courses out of the way so I could focus on the stuff I really wanted to focus on when I went to college. And because I did all of that AP testing, I got to schedule my classes before all of my classmates because I was ahead in credit hours. And so I got to have the best schedule.
That's good advice. And also speak to your high school counselor, because I'm sure that they would be able to advise you in which, like your teachers and your counselors, on which classes you should be taking if you're interested in this path or a different one. We have another question. What advice would you give to a lower income community when eating habits can be a financial burden to some families? And how can we focus on better eating habits to change the culture at home? Great question.
Yeah, that is a really, really great question. So I work with a lot of low income families. And actually one of my things that I really want to get across is you don't have to have a lot of money to eat healthy. For example, I have a big passion on why I say it's not better if you eat at Whole Foods, right? You're not a healthier person if you go to a more expensive grocery store. Really, the basic fundamentals of nutrition can be met on any community, or excuse me, at any economic level. We have a lot of great government assistance programs, and it just depends on what you do with that. I worked in a low income program, and we even had this recipe book of all of these great budget friendly things that you can use. You can use canned goods or you can use fresh produce, right? It just depends on what works best for your family, and you can be healthy at any income level.
Awesome. Thank you. Really good question.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one that this relates to everyone, but especially right now. How has COVID affected your job?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of affected me in a really positive way. So before COVID started, I was working in a physician office. So I was seeing the pediatrician that I work for, their clients once a week in their office. And since COVID started, that's when I started to see my patients remotely. And I realized how much more effective it is to see them remotely. And so that's actually what pushed me to start my own business. So thank goodness for COVID for that reason alone, that it gave me the courage to go out on my own.
Well, it's nice to think of that silver lining, always find the silver lining, even in a tough situation. Even in COVID, there's positive things that can happen. So that's a great example. A couple more questions here before we wrap up. Let's see, what accomplishments are you most proud of?
Oh man, that's a really good question. For me, it's just when I feel especially my teenage patients are finally, there's this moment where it just clicks for them. I can't predict exactly what session it's going to be. It could be the second session. It could be the sixth session, but you see that moment of clarity where they understand that what you're saying is something that they can do and something that they want to do. So one of my favorite client success stories is I had a patient who was struggling with high cholesterol, high triglycerides, and his weight. And Finally, after 3 sessions, he got it, and he lost 60 pounds between his senior year and starting college. And so it wasn't anything drastic. It was just changing the things that he was eating and starting to exercise on a regular basis. But he finally got it, and seeing that clarity is definitely the most rewarding thing.
Awesome. What a great story.
Mhm.
So I know growing up, as a kid, a lot of times you like see things on TV or you hear things or you look at other people and you like have these thoughts about like, maybe I should look more like this. Could you talk a little bit about how like being healthy and having good nutrition doesn't necessarily mean like losing weight, and kind of what that
Mhm.
looks like for nutrition for everybody is something different?
Yeah. So remembering that like weight is only one step of the equation, right? And I always tell this to my patients. I don't care where you are on the growth chart, as long as you're doing what you need in order to be a healthy individual. Like you could have someone who is at the bottom, towards the bottom of the growth chart, and they're eating junk food all day. Or you can have someone who's maybe higher on the growth chart or off the growth chart, but they're eating whole grains, fruits and vegetables, lean meat. And at the end of the day, we all know like who's going to be the healthier person in the long run. So I also think about it in terms of like, if you have pipes at home that are running through your plumbing, right? You don't want to block it with all sorts of junk, right? It doesn't matter how wide that the pipe is. Eventually it's going to get clogged up. So who cares if your pipe is bigger as long as it's cleared?
That's a great example.
Mhm.
Mr. Murray would like to know how being a vegan affects your diet.
Yeah, so being a vegan is definitely, it can be a limited diet, but it can also be a really healthy diet. And I think that that is something that everyone should realize is like you can be healthy with whatever diet you want. So being a vegan means you're not having any animal-based products. So you're going to be more likely to have deficiencies in iron and vitamin B12, as well as calcium and possibly vitamin D. So the majority of vegans that I work with do take a supplement for at least B12 and iron, as those are difficult to get in the diet without any kind of animal-based products.
Awesome. Great explanation. Okay, we've got a couple more. What are some good nutritional tips for student athletes?
Oh, wonderful question. So I work with a lot of athletes. And so number one, it depends on what sport you're playing. So someone who's running cross country is going to have different needs than someone who's playing football, just because the kind of exercise that they're doing is going to be completely different. So I work with athletes on both ends of the spectrum. And so the best thing I can say is it depends, but just like some quick facts, make sure you're fueling for what you're doing. So you're eating about 60 minutes before any kind of performance. So any kind of practice or game, make sure you're fueling well for that. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water, at least 8 cups a day. Here in Florida, where I live, it's way hotter than that. So I encourage my athletes to drink more. If you're exercising for more than 60 to 90 minutes, making sure you're replacing with some electrolytes because you're sweating for a long time. So when I say electrolytes, it's something like Body Armor, Powerade, Gatorade, whatever you guys might like the most, because you're, like I said, you're losing a lot of fluid. So you're losing a lot of sodium and potassium and all sorts of things like that.
If there was only one thing you could eat for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, so mine's chocolate. That's not very dietetic, but mine would be chocolate.
Do you prefer a certain kind of chocolate, like dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Yes, I do. The Dove squares, that dark chocolate. That's like my favorite guilty pleasure.
Little plug there for Dove chocolate. I love it. Okay. And then what made you, so you said you decided at, I think 14 that you were like,
Mhm.
this is what you wanted to do. What
Yep.
helped you make that decision?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely working with someone who was in that profession. So where I went to school, it was part of our guidance counseling program to work with someone in the field we were considering to do like a daily shadow. And that can give you a much better idea if that's a job that you want to do, because there's only so much you can really like read online, for example. So definitely just like reach out to people that you're interested in what they do for a living and say, hey, can I come and see what you do for a day? Almost always they'll say absolutely, unless it's some kind of like danger to you on why you can't be there. But definitely like reach out to those professionals, because they're going to be the biggest influence on whether or not you want to move forward in that profession.
That's a great answer there. Okay. A last call for any other questions before we say goodbye to Betsy.
Does your metabolism affect the way a diet affects somebody?
Yeah, so everyone has a different metabolism. So this is the analogy that I like. So we have different kinds of cars on the road. You have motorcycles or you have trucks, and they all have very different gas mileage. So basically our metabolism is our gas mileage for our bodies. And your diet can affect it. But believe it or not, the way we burn most of our calories is by not doing anything at all. It's called our basal metabolic rate. And so that's just baseline how many calories we need for our body to function in a certain way. Okay. So that is not really a number you can change very much. It's really the other stuff that you can make change in. But I will say, if you go for a long period of time without eating, and for, I don't know, days, weeks, you're in a really big calorie deficit, meaning you're not getting enough calories, it slows down your metabolism, at least temporarily, because your body thinks that it's going into a starvation mode. So it will hold on to those calories much more, even when you start refueling.
So is that why when you're sick and you don't really feel like eating and you're low energy, but then like as you start to get better, it's like you have to go step by step because your body has to kind of come out of that like deficit?
Exactly. It's actually pretty difficult to come back from that deficit because your body doesn't like to run on fat and protein. It likes to run on carbs.
Yeah. So try and eat your bread and crackers and stay hydrated when you don't
Whole
feel well, I
grain,
guess, right?
fruits and vegetables.
There you go.